Exactly, and that's you were saying at the top of the show that Mervyn King is saying this is the worst financial catastrophe in the history of the universe. And why? It's because bankers have misallocated capital. That's their single job. They're supposed to allocate capital into productive enterprises,
right,
not into fraud and casinos and scams.
Right, and how do they do that? They do that by using derivatives to steer the risk of capitalism into the public domain, and they keep the reward. When derivatives and the options volatility formula is kind of like the splitting of the atom. You know, they split capitalism between risk and reward and created a financial nuclear bomb in which they keep all of the reward and all the risk is rotting in the rest of the society.
And he also says it's un-American. If you want to look at what is American and what isn't, just look up Thomas Jefferson or John Adams, or what they said about bankers and Wall Street. I mean, they make us look tame.
Right. Jefferson famously thought that bankers were the biggest threat to liberty. You know, going back to 1999, remember the anti-globalization movement, as it was called back then. They had the battle in Seattle, and there was a huge outcry at that time against globalization. Now, 10, 11 years later, you've got the Naomi Kleins and the Michael Moores, and these people finally realize it's the bankers, stupid.
And now one banker has gone to jail over the last 3 years, and that's Bernie Madoff. And everybody says that was a bad apple. The rest of the system is fine, and the financial system has collapsed by pure sheer coincidence. Nothing happened to cause it. So we're going to turn to this headline: Madoff whistleblower tells King World News banks stealing from pensions. Now, this is Harry Markopolos. He's the one that 10 years before the Madoff fraud collapsed, he was the one that wrote to the SEC a 10, 15-page letter outlining exactly why Bernie Madoff was a Ponzi scheme and how it was operating. Well, Harry Markopolos is involved in this lawsuit against Bank of New York Mellon. He's the one that gave all the evidence to the Attorney General of New York. And let's turn to this clip from King World News.
Every day, every time a state pension fund traded, the bank would steal approximately 0.3% from every transaction. Every time a pension fund bought a currency, the bank would mark a high price for the day. They would look back, because currency trades in a 24-hour clock. What the Bank of New York would do is look back 20 hours and assign all state pension funds purchase transactions at the high of the day. And every time a state pension fund tried to sell a currency, they would assign them a price at the lows of the day. And they would pocket the difference. And they did that not for just 10 years, but for decades. Every day for decades.
Well, it brings up 3 points as I count them. Number one, that pension funds are abused. This is where banks dump risk. When they make a bad bet and it's a losing bet, they dump it in the pension account. I myself have done this on Wall Street many times when I was working on Wall Street. We did these look-back trades.
Is this your Jim Cramer moment?
Well, I've said this before. You know, you put on a big option trade, a volatility trade at the end of the day. You don't give an account number to the options dealer on the desk, you know, because they're in line for a big Christmas bonus. And then at the end of the day, if it's a loser, you dump it into a pension account or you give it to a corporation for a tax loss. If it's a winner, you go into an account that you've already got a prearranged relationship with where there's a massive kickback. And this is most of the trading on Wall Street is like this. Number two, the scam itself of skimming pennies, skimming small amounts of money on every single transaction. It went completely unnoticed for years and years and years. What did I say last week? If you introduced a Tobin tax, which is exactly the amount of money we're talking about here, nobody would notice it. I got emails from people saying, of course, people would notice it. It would destroy the banking industry. You can't introduce a Tobin tax. But here you have a perfect example. They stole a certain percentage of every single transaction. Nobody noticed it for decades. It's similar with a Tobin tax, a small 0.5% or 1% transaction fee. Not a single person would notice it if you never told them.
So this is essentially a Tobin tax that Bank of New York Mellon has been imposing upon the bottom 99%. But dare you suggest that we reverse that and take that back from the 1% and with a Tobin tax? They're like screeching that this is un-American, this is anti-capitalist. Well, what is it when Bank of New York Mellon does that to the 99% of their customers?
Right. It's fraud, but they say it's fraud in the service of liquidity and market making. Same thing Goldman Sachs says. Lloyd Blankfein, when he goes to Congress, he says, yes, we commit fraud every day, but we need it to keep markets open. Now, the third point, of course, is that this revelation will go unheeded. Nobody will act on it. They're part of a criminal syndicate. This is why they go unpunished, because they're not being prosecuted as a racket, as under RICO.
To explain to the audience who the Bank of New York Mellon is, here's the Wikipedia on them. They have $1.2 trillion in assets under management and $25.5 trillion in assets under custody and administration, thereby being the largest deposit bank in the world. It is the oldest banking corporation in the United States, tracing its origins to the establishment of the Bank of New York in 1784 by Alexander Hamilton.
Right, and those are passive accounts from old ladies sitting on fortunes. And every single month they get their statement and they get out their magnifying glass and they try to figure out if the bank stole money from them this month, but they're very good at doing it, so they can't pick it up. Or other pension accounts, or their teachers, or their firemen. Remember, all these public workers' accounts, they're being vilified because they want a living wage. Meanwhile, their pensions are being destroyed by Bank of New York and other banks, so they're getting really gang-banged from both directions.
Well, Harry Markopolos points out in the interview that if you have a pension, basically you have been defrauded by Bank of New York Mellon because everything passes through there. That's the $25.5 trillion in assets. It flows through there as the deposit bank.
So emphasize that point as far as the infrastructure goes in management of the pension fund industry. They are at a key choke point in that whole infrastructure, and as gatekeepers, they're bandits essentially, because as the money goes through the system, they stand there as a gatekeeper or as a bandit, and they steal on every single transaction, and now it's just becoming revealed. The attorney general will have to be bought off or bribed or caught in a sex scandal, so no prosecution, and nothing will.
And now, importantly, there's the Occupy Wall Street. They're trying to get to New York Stock Exchange. Right around the corner is the Bank of New York Mellon, surrounded by police. And here's the last clip from Harry Markopolos I want to play.
If Al-Qaeda had done this to Americans, SEAL Team 6 will be dropping in, but the banks did that. And so maybe law enforcement needs to drop into those corporate boardrooms and treat them like SEAL Team 6 treated Osama bin Laden. They think they're above the law. They're arrogant. They're saying they're going to defend. They say they're innocent, yet they refuse to set trial dates. And they're stealing from tens of millions of Americans. And by the way, Bank of New York Mellon's a TARP bank, so we bailed them out so they could pay bonuses by stealing our pension money.
Duh. When saying these are financial terrorists, now finally other people are comparing them to other terrorists. There's a strong case to be made that, yes, these are financial terrorists. Number two, America has the death penalty already. They're already killing dozens and hundreds of people in states like Texas, okay? Instead of focusing on killing poor black people, why not go after the rich white guys on Wall Street? You've already got the death penalty in place. Pull the frickin' trigger, you wusses.
So like he said, you know, SEAL Team 6, those police protecting Bank of New York Mellon from the protesters, their pension funds have been defrauded by the bank behind them that they're protecting. Why don't they take the bank, drop it into the ocean somewhere, put it on an airplane, fly it over the Atlantic, and drop it in the ocean?
Right, they're the cops in front of the bank, trying to protect the bank from the protesters. And behind their back, the banks are ripping them off blind, you stupid frickin' cop idiots! Stacey Herbert, thanks so much on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away much more.